says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell Gillard!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, and joining me for another week that was for the Parramatta Eels and the NRL are my good mates, 60s and Clint. 60s wasn't so long ago that we just recorded another podcast. How you been in the meantime, mate?
Melting.
It is
Melting
pretty
is
warm.
a word.
It's getting worse tomorrow too.
It is very warm out here in the Golden West, but yes, it suddenly seems like a very short number of hours ago that we were up at Kellyville recording our podcast with Mark O'Neill. We'll talk about that momentarily. But yeah, doing good. Looking forward to a couple of weeks off maybe from the footy with the Christmas break coming up where the players get a bit of time away, get a bit of a chance to unwind with family and friends and what have you before they're back into their work early January. So, yeah, hoping everyone else out there is going well as well. Clint, how you doing, mate?
Well, ditto on the melting. Gents, I've probably been averaging a packet of Super Dupers. Well, I want to say a packet, I mean a full packet, one every 48 to 72 hours over the last week or so. So that's about where I'm at.
That sounds about right. Hard to stay fresh with this heat and humidity. And with Christmas around the corner, boys, it's a good time to get some presents. And my young nephew's just picked up golf, funnily enough. So he's coming up in the new year, which means I know where I'm taking him. And that's Big Swing Golf North America,
Very nice.
Of course. Yeah, he's actually, he's really keen to play some golf when he comes up here. So we're going to be excited to get him out there and maybe get him a few clubs. So yeah, thanks to Big Swing Golf, who are partners of the show, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan and Parramatta. Fantastic sponsors for the Tip Sheet, helping us get each and every episode out. And with that done, boys, let's get right into it.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, let's start off having a bit of a chat about our conversation with Mark O'Neill yesterday. If you haven't had a listen to the podcast as yet, please do so. Mark's very kind with his time. He makes sure that he gives us a bit of a season review and a look ahead at what's happening across all the grades and the NRL and NRLW around December every year. So we're really grateful for that. We tried to cover as many areas as we could in a chat that went for about 3/4 of an hour. I'm sure there's always those people out there that expect us to be 60 minutes and put the...
Well, you've got the namesake,
bright
mate. Come on.
into his
How
face
can you
and-
call yourself 60s if you're not going to be a hard-hitting investigative journalist? Come on, mate.
Yeah, so, but look, we asked Mark about the 2023 season, the roster. I put it to him, my opinion that we were a bit lacking in the depth in the back line. We had a chat about how the players are going in the pre-season, what's happened with the new recruits, their introduction to the Eels, how they feel about joining the club, the difference that they've already found already, the Young Pathways players coming through. We had a chat about the coaching staff that have in place for the lower grades and also the junior reps, and talking about Steve Georgalis joining the club, NRLW, potential recruitment for NRLW. There was quite a lot that we needed to cover. So, yeah, mate, I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed being able to sit down and cover all those areas with Mark yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I know that there were some people that were not content with some of the questions, but I thought he was pretty frank with what you sort of probed them with about the depth in the outside backs and how 2023 played out. And, he like I said, he was frank and said we weren't good enough. And I think that really is the baseline. The Eels weren't good enough. And it's going to be the challenge now to, aim up in season 2024 and get back to the standards that they've been able to deliver from 2019 through to season 2022, where they've been contenders or grand finalists, in those seasons. So, yeah, very thankful to Mark for the time. The Eels are very busy in the run to Christmas. There's a lot happening as they wrap up for their administrative leave across the holidays, and he managed to squeeze us in, which was much appreciated.
And mate, I wanted to ask you a question. What did you think about the vibe in the Eels admin HQ?
Yeah, it was buzzing, wasn't it? There was a lot of people there, which is good to see. A lot of people busy still. We saw some media stuff happening, some stuff with apparel, and some really cool cataloguing of the club's history. So they've been very busy in that regard. And yeah, the vibe between staff members was great. New face in Steve Georgalis has been made to feel at home. Nathan Brown, we talk about vibe. Nathan Brown is a vibe, isn't he? And it's going to be a real shame to lose him. But he's a wonderful character, and you can see that he's very popular at the club. Just the club looks like it's in a really healthy space, at least off the field in that regard. And you'd imagine on the field the players going to be pretty fired up as well.
Yeah, well, look, it was. I thought, as you said, the just the positivity around the place, how busy everyone was, but there was also, there was a few laughs there. The people just seem to be enjoying being in the workplace there yesterday, and I think when you see a happy administration area like that, I think it says something about the position that the club's in. Just that, getting that, and I know it comes down still to actually getting certain things done that administration needs to, but it was just good to see such a not just a happy but a busy, very busy administration area there yesterday. So our thanks to the Eels for having us up there at Kellyville to accommodate us to record the podcast there. Mark for his time, Steve Georgalis, who came in, had a bit of a chat with us, Nathan Brown, a quick little chat, and all the other staff that we managed to catch up with there yesterday, Jordan Rankin. And look, it was a really enjoyable trip up to Eels HQ. And as I said, please make sure that you do have a listen to the podcast, and I guess take whatever you want out of our chat there. And I think, like you said, when we asked about this season, and there wasn't this last season, there were no excuses offered. Nothing about trying to throw in the draw or things like that. It was just, look, we weren't. The bottom line is we weren't good enough, and we have to be better. So I don't think you could ask for more.
Indeed.
Okay, fellas, pretty big news on the partnerships front with the Eels. First of all, partnering with Parramatta Council, John.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a landmark deal, given that we have the Northern Territory Agreement, which I suppose is very similar, but it's right in that vein, isn't it? With a pretty comprehensive deal to go alongside the Parramatta City Council, and sort of build up that Parramatta brand for both the football club and the actual district.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's quite a lot of councils that are in the Eels catchment area. And of course, two of the really big ones are Parramatta Council and the Hills Council. Now, the Hills are involved heavily with the Eels, with the HQ being up in the Hills Shire district. And then, of course, the Eels themselves, when it comes to playing, they're called the Parramatta Eels. They play at Parramatta. They play at CommBank Stadium in Parramatta. They're synonymous with the city of Parramatta. So we've got a partnership that plays into that. What's your thoughts on it, Clint?
Look, it's a very natural fit, and the fact of the matter is, Parramatta as the epicenter of Western Sydney is really booming. If you haven't walked around the city centre of Parramatta at the moment, there's almost a high rise going up there every month. There's plenty of cranes in the ground. We touched on the light rail in previous weeks, which is due to open in May 2024. We got confirmation during the course of the last week that, as we all expected, Metro West was going ahead because construction hadn't stopped. There's a real buzz around the Parramatta City Centre, and obviously the council wants to leverage one of its best assets and its primary sporting team in the Eels, and I think it's a good opportunity for a mutually beneficial relationship there. It's a very natural fit, and obviously with Parramatta City growing and set to boom across the next decade, why would you not leverage your best asset and your best sporting team in the Eels?
It is a deal that will draw some degree of controversy. People are always critical of how councils and governments spend their money, and there will be a section arguing that a sports franchise should not be receiving funding from the council. But it is important to distinguish where some of this money is going to go, or where a significant portion of this money will go, which includes local women's sports scholarships, player clinics, holiday camps, and community events built around the Parramatta Eels game day. So it is stuff that will go into the community. It's not just lining the Parramatta Eels pockets here.
No, and I think that's important. And as you say, in a sense, there's a similarity with partnering with the Northern Territory government, which is really just the major part of that is playing an NRL match there each year and then having community events around that one match. Well, the Parramatta City Council has an Eels team that is playing every other home match in the city of Parramatta, and having scholarships based around the partnership, having things like match day activations. It should be something that's beneficial to both partners there. There's also just been announced the partnership with the TAB. Now, that in itself usually gets a little bit of a reaction for people that aren't fond of sports teams, or even, actual leagues being associated with gambling. But I think, fellas, it's fair to say that you're not ever going to separate professional sport from gambling options.
The gambling money is becoming intrinsic, not just the rugby league, but in Australia, sports in general. It is a huge part of what makes the codes so profitable. And, unfortunately, it's now part and parcel. I say unfortunately, some people obviously wouldn't see it as unfortunate, but it is now part and parcel of, rugby league and other professional sports. So gambling sponsorship, it's something that I know in terms of the government, they have talked about potentially, changing the rules about this, a la what we saw with alcohol and cigarettes, right? But it is such a powerful part of the game, so... Yeah, the club's doing the right thing by the club and partnering up with the TAB here, and makes sense.
And look, we should also mention that we're talking about something that's worldwide in terms of the gambling dollar linking with professional sports. So it's not like this is something that is unique to Australia. What are we talking about with the NRL taking the game to Las Vegas? They're looking at the
gambling
game.
capital of the world.
It's not so much. It's not so much reading between the lines as so much as having it blasted in your face there with Vegas, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think it's probably a good fit for the club to be partnering with, just like other clubs might have their stadium sponsored by a betting agency or organisation. Other clubs having some level of sponsorship with different organisations. So, it's this is now the Parramatta Eels' first venture into partnering with a gambling organisation, and they just happen to have partnered with the biggest one in the TAB. So, look, the council, the TAB, I don't know if there's going to be too much room left on the Eels gear now to carry sponsorship logos.
Well, it's lucky they're doing deals outside of the paraphernalia, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, full marks to our commercial team. I'm sure Andrew McHale's doing a great job there with the Eels with a lot of this. So, full marks to Parramatta there. Now, moving towards a little bit of football. Clint, we've got the junior rep trials. this weekend down at Camden, 4 trials we got happening in. We've got a bit of they're sort of like double header arrangements, but yeah, 4 trials down there at Camden.
Yeah, and we were chatting pre-show about the biggest concern with those games is that it's set to be another scorcher on Saturday. We've got 36 out here in the hills where you and I are 60s. Camden gets a wee bit hotter than that, and certainly in the warmest part of the day. At this stage, trials are scheduled and ready to go ahead, and it'll be the first get out for some of our youngsters against the Canberra Raiders, meeting at a quote unquote midpoint between the nation's capital and Parramatta at Camden. But there's probably questions, boys, whether this game goes, any of these games go ahead.
Yeah, you'd have to wonder about that. Look, no doubt there'll be all care taken with drinks breaks and getting the players into the shade when they're having breaks, that sort of thing. But they've got to finalise the squads. By early January, they'll be looking to trim the numbers down by about 10 or 12 from squads that are up near 40. So it's all. I mean, this is their regular trial period, so they normally get one trial in before Christmas, and then another couple of trials in January, and then ready to start the junior rep season in February. And look, that's the nature of the beast, is that the junior rep season primarily takes place in a very warm part of the year. It takes place in primarily February and March, and then you get the finals sort of like April into the start of May. But that February-March period is a very hot time, and the players are playing, late morning into early afternoon across a lot of those fixtures. So there's no escaping the heat for them. Now, just moving on, training, fellas, it's been a couple of big sessions this week, warm conditions. For those people who read Monday's report, they would have noted that I said our captain, Gutho, he said he'd be back running before Christmas, and he was actually doing a little bit of running on Monday. They'll ease him in. It wasn't too much running. I guess he's on schedule. If he said he was going to be running before Christmas and he's running before Christmas, then he's pretty much on schedule. I think they wrap up around the middle of next week with all of their training. It was a big week last week. Started off with they started the very first part of their contact opposed work. They did a bit of contact opposed work today. Really fast-paced session today. I will be writing up a report on it, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. But needless to say, as I said, very fast-paced and quite an impressive session to watch. So that's the update there. Finally, I guess we should have thrown this in with talking about the sponsorships. But John, we had the Thunder and the Eels coming together for a membership deal.
Yeah, it's a sort of partnership of a lot of common sense, I'd say. They're non-competing codes. It's not like it's AFL and Rugby League or Rugby Union Rugby League partnering up here. Cricket and Rugby League sort of work really nicely. One's a summer sport, one's a winter sport, and being two of the high-profile Sydney franchises or Western Sydney franchises, yeah, it's good to see the club sort of exploring different avenues to connect to a wider fan base. So well done on both sides there. Hopefully it works out well for both the Thunder and the Eels. But yeah, we saw Quinton Gufferson and Jason Sanger partner up for the promo there, and it was really good to see.
Yeah, and just before we move into our intermission break, there's been a few questions asked to me about the Eels Open training session. Why isn't there one at Kellyville this year before Christmas that they normally try to get in one where the kids are on holidays and they get an open training session. If you've seen the Kellyville, it is a construction site at the moment. It just would not be a venue that could deal with having, potentially
Sure.
a couple of thousand fans
Having
there.
spectators on the field with the actual players themselves pretty much at the moment.
Yeah, that's it. So, it's just not conducive to having a viewing area of training, let alone the parking situation, because with the construction going on, pretty much half of the car parks disappeared with the fencing that's there for the construction. So, it's unfortunate, but I know there's going to be some events planned in the new year, like to kick off the season. So stand by for details on those when the club releases them. Okay, John, what have you got for us this week as we head into our...
I think it was fitting with the weather being the way it is, but a bit of Chase the Sun, the anthem of World Darts. So anyone that's seen the World Darts Tour, the crowd, as you can hear them in that sample there, are quite vocal and get right into it, and it's actually a bit of a catchy beat.
World Darts, did you say?
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I had no idea. I would have gotten as far as guessing it's clearly a British crowd based on that chant. But no, never would have guessed that.
Never heard of the wizard Simon Whitlock, Aussie darts player. It was pretty good back in the day. But yeah,
can you bet on it?
Oh yeah, you can bet on it. Have you never heard the commentator going 180 when they hit the 3 triple 20s?
Look, I admit I've watched a tiny little bit of darts, but mate, you never struck me as the darts enthusiast.
It is. I'm not an enthusiast, but it is cracking background TV when there's nothing on. There's an absolute drought in terms of the pay TV coverage. You just throw on the channel that the darts are on, and you'll get completely over the top. They're throwing darts, but it's like completely over the top.
What channel is the darts on?
I think it's around 506.
Like ESPN Ocho.
Yeah, well, you'd figure it'd be Ocho type stuff, but I think it's like 506. No, that might be racing. I'd have to have a look at the channel guide, but it's because 509 is ESPN, 506 I think is racing, so maybe it's like 505 or something like that. I don't know when it's on consistently, but I've seen enough of it in the background to appreciate it, and the Chase the Sun is a very catchy beat.
And if we've got any dart watchers out there, maybe jump in the comments and correct us which is on, because I will happily get on and do some research on this.
I'm gonna tip something just from watching it once or twice, that the drinks break is a big feature.
I don't think there's a drinks break so much as there's a break from drinking, rather.
Yes, yes, that's right. The
darts
is the break from drinking. Yes, indeed.
It's the old. I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out.
Exactly, same sort of energy right there.
Okay, fellas. Well, let's get on with the NRL news now. The gift that keeps on giving. Our good mates at the West Tigers, John. I mean, what can you say?
Well, maybe it isn't the gift that keeps on giving anymore. Maybe this is the one final gift before Christmas. The ultimate Christmas present to the rest of the code, because they've finally moved them on. Well done to I think it was 1,000 fan petition that sparked the sort of audit of the board that led to them standing down in the totality of the board, sorry. So this is a new era. Lee Hadjipantelis, Justin Pascoe, the entire board, right? They're all gone. Well, Pascoe being the CEO, sorry. They're all gone, and it was almost like a watershed day for both the Tigers and the Code, because this marks the end of a comical era of mismanagement. And maybe they get it wrong still in the new appointments, but odds are they can't get much worse. So I suppose there's a glimmer of hope now for the West Tigers fans.
Well, a couple of well-known leaders step in Barry Unsworth and Shane Richardson. So, I mean, you're talking about blokes that have got massive reputations in not just in rugby league, but in the business world and the political world as well. So there's a little bit at stake for them, even though they're in, the just temporary roles at the moment. They're interim CEO and board. What's the actual position for Barry Unsworth? Is he like the
Interim chairman for Barry
interim
O'Farrell.
Interim chairman. That's it. So interim chairman, interim CEO. Obviously, making sure that the coach knows that he's got their full backing straight away. That was important. But they're going to operate on a trimmed down version of the board for the time being. And what's been the feel, fellas, for the reaction from the fans? Clint, have you noticed anything in particular?
I have noticed a trend of some Eels fans getting a little bit concerned of, if they're getting their act together, then they become greater competition to us. But boys, you can't sugarcoat what's happened at the Tigers over the better part of the last decade. And it's not going to be fixed by a couple of magical silver bullet appointments. You think of everything we went through with our challenges, and we actually had to have a state-appointed administrator, and we had to go through a review and all those reforms through that had to be voted in. If the Constitution isn't going to allow for them to have better quality people continue to come into those roles in the long term, they're just going to eventually end back up the same spot. So, I'm not too, admittedly, I'm not across the Tigers Constitution, but, in a merged entity like the West Tigers, you've got Balmain on one side and the Western Suburbs on the other, who have not seen eye to eye for quite some time. So they're definitely going to need to break some bread in order for this to be something sustainable, as opposed to just a shooting star moment.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things that Max did when he was appointed as the administrator of the Parramatta Leagues Club was, as the Leagues Club were the owners of the Parramatta National Rugby League team, he appointed an independent board that oversaw what was happening there at the Eels. And then, of course, we had the change in constitution, which allowed for a whole lot of changes as far as the Parramatta Leagues Club were concerned. And as we've just noted, that was important for the long term for the Eels, because of the fact that the Parramatta Leagues Club are the owners of the franchise for the Parramatta Eels. So it is more complicated, as you noted, Clint, with the West Tigers being a joint venture. So where it goes from
take nothing away from what's happened. There's some good decisions that have happened out there, and there's some strong people coming in. Whether they've got the guts, the guile, or the means, and the ability to influence and leverage their business know-how and stakeholders in and around the club, to be seen. But you probably can't get too many better, well-credentialed people for the Tigers sake to come in. But looking, we've had a couple of jokes at his expense across the year, and that's because he's given us the fuel to do so. But wasn't it an old-fashioned Jane Lynch job on our mate Lee Hajipantawas? Whether it was right or wrong, and we probably sit in the camp where we believe for the West Tigers fans' sake it was his time, but it was absolutely teamed up on this one.
Yeah, and not happy. Not happy.
No, there's some bitterness. There's a little bit of bitterness out there. But
which becomes interesting from a sponsorship perspective.
Oh yeah, that's the law firm stuff gone 100%. So that
you also got to ask the question there as well. Was he really looking out for the Tigers' best interests in that case? If he's someone who is a Tigers man at heart, he can have his own personal grievance and disappointment without throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well. You know, if you really are club first, you shouldn't be pulling it for those reasons. I'm sure we'll get a justification when it does eventually happen. It's not for that, it's for other reasons. You know, we've had to reassess our business and redistribute funds, and we decided to commit to only doing the New South Wales Blues or something like that. But if you really are club first, then it's a good opportunity for him to show that there isn't personal bitterness there.
I think
we know he is.
Clint, I think we've seen enough of club politics in the past to know that a person can be on the surface that they want to put the club first, but there's been a number of instances in the past where there's things that are done that aren't always in the best interest of.
Which, if that happens as well, 60s, does it not justify the decision that took place yesterday?
Yeah. So look, if that is the case, and I mean probably one of the worst things that can happen, and this is what we hated seeing with Parramatta, was every time there was an election, it was all of the infighting and what have you would be all over the media. All of the campaign would be all over the media. The comments about other people that are were competing were standing for election. It'd be all in the media. It just wouldn't be nice stuff. So it'll be interesting to see whether there's any sort of reaction from those that have been ousted, or whether the club marches forward without having to look in the rearview mirror in this instance. So anyway, we move on because the Tigers still have some other areas that they're featuring in for the news this week. John, they've made a signing in terms of a rugby union convert by the name of Solomon Alamelo. They've evidently missed out on a couple of big signings, however.
Yeah, so Alamilo comes across from rugby union, bit of a speedster, looking at his highlights, and you know what? To their credit, the Tigers have had a bit of luck, whether it's luck or good scouting, if you want to say it, in the outside backs in recent years, with the fullback and the winger there, Junior Tupou, and I always forget the fullback's name.
Jerome Buller.
Jerome Buller, there you go. So maybe he can be, for the third sort of cog there in the back line, but as good news as that is for him, the bad news is that they're pulling it. I say bad news. They are pulling their offer for Adam Fanua-Blake, apparently, in the wake of the St. George Illawarra Dragons offering what must be said as a mammoth deal for the prop that we'll talk about shortly, and that leaves them still chasing Jerome Luai. But unfortunately there, it looks like the Bulldogs have now slipped into the box seat if the media reports are to be believed.
Okay, well, let's then talk about, I mean, do we really need, we've spoken about this plenty of times in the past, the Dogs seem to be able to secure players with, I mean, it seems like they're referenced with everyone that's on the market, and someone like Jerome Luai is not going to come cheap. I guess we're talking at least $1 million a year with that signing. Somehow they fit them in. They just keep fitting them in.
The Tigers were at 1.1, right, with their last offer for Jerome Luai there. So 1.1 per for 4 years. So you'd imagine the Dogs would have to at least be in the ballpark, so they would put him at the 7-figure threshold there. And the last report we had, Quint, was that the Dogs had upped their offer to a 5-year duration. Yeah. So that's a significant investment right there.
Yeah, absolutely. In a player who his own coach says hasn't really, although he's a premiership winner, hasn't really shown that he can guide a team around the paddock. So manage a game.
Legendary quote right there. That is. I mean, I know it's a bit of you could argue it's sort of
he's not what you're after.
Gamesmanship when it comes to retention, but jeez. Yeah.
He's only a 500k player. Let him be our problem.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you mentioned the St George Dragons. A couple of things to talk about with them. First of all, they've picked up Corey Allen from the Roosters, and you also then said that they're now favoured to get Aden Fanua-Blake. What sort of money are we talking about, mate?
I think the numbers I saw bandied about by the Sydney Morning Herald were $5 million over 4 years.
Oh,
I could be mistaken there, but I'm pretty certain that's what I saw yesterday. That is insane money. We're talking about a bloke that's turning 29 next year, so he's in his prime. But and you can certainly make a case that he's a top 3, top 5 prop in the NRL, but that puts him among the very best players, the very best playmakers in the game, in the code.
He needs to sign that contract before it disappears.
100%. Yeah, if you're his manager, unless he is the big thing for him is to win a ring to get that premiership. If he wants to talk about securing his financial future, he would be insane not to have inked that paper yesterday.
Because the second the season starts, he becomes a depreciating asset.
That's right. The risk of injury, any sort of thing like that, bad form, all that sort of stuff can contribute. Most prominently though, the injury. So yes, he would be silly not to have that. If that is his prerogative for prioritizing financial gain the most, then yes. And yeah, just
with his resume, this is once in a career money, and it's the sort of money. When I say once in a career, well, you could probably say there's more than half or 3/4 of the NRL would like to have a once in a career moment like that. As you said, he's right up there with the contract earners, the highest contract earners of the playmakers. How often do you see a prop getting that sort of money?
That's more than Mitch Moses money, isn't it?
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
it's crazy.
Are props worth that much?
Clearly to the Dragons.
I mean, we have seen a trend of dynamic middle forwards getting to that 7-figure bracket. Jason Taumalolo and I believe Payne Haas, if he has or if not when he negotiates his next contract, will be right in that same bracket. But I don't know if it's anywhere near a successful formula.
Do you think? Can I just ask? Let me just jump in here and ask, and then get the opinion of the two of you. Do you think the Cowboys have had value for money for that money for Jason Taumalolo?
God, no.
No.
And Taumalolo was better this year, but he'd seen a significant dip in his form across the last couple of years as well. And that was just the reality of a guy that his play style was, it wears the body down. And as dynamic as Taumalolo is, and he is arguably the biggest athletic freak in the NRL, and I know Payne Haas is up there too, but Taumalolo was more dynamic than Payne Haas in terms of his, at least in attack, his lateral explosiveness. That sort of stuff wears you down with the workload that you take in rugby league. You don't get to be an offensive-only player in our code. So, yeah, invest in that sort of money.
And the rules have also shifted since he signed that contract and away from a style that suited his playing style.
Great point. And they're the things you can't really factor in when you're making these negotiations, which is why you need to be somewhat reticent to leveraging those sort of funds towards a middle forward. And look, the Parramatta Eels have invested heavily in their middles. Junior Barlaw, Reagan Campbell-Gillard, Ryan Madison, but nowhere near the extent. Even the $200,000-$300,000 or a bit more, honestly, that you're talking about on a per contract basis, that adds up very quickly. And that is the difference between Aden Fanua-Blake and Reagan Campbell-Gillard or Junior Barlaw. So, yeah, fantastic player. I cannot fathom as a manager of football operations offering that kind of contract. And that's, again, the predicament of a struggling club.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a desperate play.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, fan bases and administrative bodies don't have the patience to facilitate, and I know it's a meme, but the 5-year plan, the 5-year rebuild that oftentimes you need in order to correctly rebuild a club through juniors and astute recruitment rather than making splashy signings and desperately trying to claw your way back into the top 8.
Yeah. So, Clint, what do you think Aden Fanua-Blake is realistically worth? If you're a CEO or a head of football, whoever's doing the negotiations, what sort of money do you think is
Well, it ultimately
Broken
depends
market,
who I'm the CEO/football manager of, and what our needs are, because that'll influence the value that I make. But let's say for this hypothetical, all players are off contract, and I can pick anyone into my top 30 from the 600 plus odd NRL players that there are available currently. And my first prop that I'm going to pick is Adam Fanua-Blake, who I would have picked after I've secured my spine. If I'm going for, I'm securing 3 members of my spine before I go for a prop forward. I would probably at most offer someone like him $800,000 a year. To be honest, I lean more towards the 750 for him. Great player, had a great season. But he's not someone that's dominated consistently for 3-4 years. Then I start talking about 850, 900, maybe even $1 million for a prop. When you've got someone who's dominated consistently for a number of seasons, that's when I start entertaining that. But in this hypothetical, I'm also not in the predicament of the Dragons, where I need to get my man and have at least a moral victory off the field to keep our fans interested and to try and bring some energy into the club. So you're always going to have to pay a tax for that, as John was alluding to in his response. So difficult question to answer, but all things equal, I think he's probably worth about 750 out there.
John, what would he be on if you were in charge of a club's recruitment? What would you place him at? And secondly, do you think there's a risk factor in recruiting him, given that his last 2 clubs he's basically looked to get out of ahead of time?
Yeah, that is an important part of the negotiation process or the scouting process. And just to clarify, it was 4.5 over 4, so not 5. It's half $1 million difference there. 1.125, not 125. Yeah, look, I think investing into your middle rotation is important. I think much like with the NFL, where you have your quarterback, and that's analogous to obviously the spine and rugby league as a collective, your 1, your 6, your 7, and there is a significant drop off to number 9. If you look at the pay rate for hookers in the NRL, it's actually shockingly low outside of the elite 2 or 3. So you talk about investing in your spine, and then you invest in the trenches. And the trenches in the NRL, that's your middles, and your dummy half, obviously. So I think that you can make a plausible case to invest good money there, but just not 1.125. Like the difference between 1.125 and what you said, Quint, at 800, which I think again is probably about the sweet spot for an elite middle forward there. And obviously that's where the Eels were roughly evaluated their 2 prime middles in Junior and Reg. That you're talking about, immediately without too much calculation, 300K, right? 300K for one signing. That is 2, base level players, close to 3 base level players, or one really
experience outside.
Exactly. One really solid contributor to your top 30. They're the differences in roster construction that obviously at the very top end for winning a premiership set your part, but just being consistently competitive will absolutely mire you down when you sort of. They're
actually incredibly crucial swings and roundabouts, those decisions, aren't they?
Yeah. And so that's why I'm with you. Fantastic player. If Eels didn't have the forwards they had, you'd love to see him at the club. But he's obviously surplus to needs of us with both, as I mentioned before, Barlaw, Campbell Gillard, and the rise of Widdera McGregor alongside some young guys that we're hoping can kick down the door in the coming years, like Sam Tuivasa. But yeah, I could not, as a GM of football or whatever equivalent role at any given club, in good conscience go above 900 if you're truly desperate, unless you have very good third parties.
It's almost mismanagement and not adhering to your fiduciary responsibility of the club, isn't it?
Yeah. It just when you talk about every signing, you sort of evaluate on how much does it move the needle for you to be competitive for a premiership, for making the top 8 on those different scales. And I think Fanua-Blake raises the floor for the Dragons, and that is important. But I don't think he moves the needle at the high end for them when it comes to being a contender. So
yeah, I think I tend to agree there. Now, just wrapping up the player market, Ezra Mam is now tipped to stay in Brisbane. I'll just add my 2 bobs worth. I think for him personally, and how early it is in his career, that may well be a very good decision.
Yeah, great. That is a win-win on both sides there. He's getting projected to be $3 million over 4 years, so $750K per season. That's, obviously incredible money for a young man. And he's got representative upside. Absolutely, we saw him. He was the Clive Churchill medalist until the last 20 minutes of that grand final. He had an absolutely outstanding, or at least an attacking, absolutely outstanding game in that grand final. He is very dynamic, a very strong ball running halfback that doesn't mind being niggly and getting up in the grill on defense. He sort of found a niche defensively to be a bit of a not necessarily instigator but unsettler. So he's
an agitator.
Yeah, exactly. And he's been great for the Broncos. Some incredible flick passes last year. So prodigious talent. Staying in a team that looks to be on the rise. I know the Broncos have lost a couple of key players this year. Tom Flegler, Herbie Farnworth, Kurt Capewell going to the Warriors. But they're still going to be a very good team, and he's going to be at the heart of it. So good move on both sides there.
Yep. Okay, and finally, a couple of court cases involving rugby league identities have been wrapped up this week, John.
Yeah, well, we start with the Hammer Boys, the Amone family, who have been... We spoke about them last week very briefly, 60s, but we finally got some clarity on the decision there. Junior Amone, the young halfback, or 5'8" for the Dragons, he escaped a prison sentence, but his father wasn't so lucky. He'll spend 2 years in prison, or with at least a minimum 12 months to be served, while Junior himself got a 2-year good behaviour bond, or the equivalent, with 300 hours of community service. So he needs to be on his best behaviour for the next couple of years there. And on the other side, off the playing field, we go to Paul Kent, who has been in the media obviously he's a media figure, but was in the press for the wrong reasons for quite some time in regards to a domestic violence allegation. He's actually been found not guilty. So now it's going to be very interesting to see what plays out from here, because I don't know if there was any slander or libel in some of the sort of rival press companies' coverage, but I know the Sydney Morning Herald sailed very close to the wind on a couple of their articles, whether he ends up pursuing anything there and whether he can reclaim his spot on Fox Sports and NRL 360 in particular. So I don't know. He's been found not guilty. Is he now going to be a victim of the allegation despite being found not guilty, or does he get his job back? Be very interesting to see whether he steps back into the media in some capacity there. And
I believe the judge instructed his barrister that he didn't even need to hear his closing statements.
Which I suppose tells you the strength, or, well, on one side, the relative strength, on the other side, the relative non-strength for the cases. So there is a lot more to happen here. This is definitely a watch this space sort of deal. And I know, look, Paul Kent is a very polarizing, I wouldn't even say polarizing, he's not a very popular individual. He's always had, very brash and brazen opinions on 360, coupled with the stuff that happened on Triple M, where, he ended up, I suppose, bullying a colleague off the air, or supposedly allegedly bullying a colleague off the air. But he's been found not guilty of a pretty serious allegation that has completely derailed his career, and whether you like him or not, that's a pretty shitty thing. So be very interesting to see what happens from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, boys, I think that just about wraps things up. How have we come in time-wise?
We are, it's 49 minutes. So this is a very brisk podcast.
Wow. This won't be good for any of those Spotify stats of how many minutes people listen to.
You can't pump up those minutes, exactly. Exactly. Just have to put them on loop.
You mentioned at the start of the show that you're probably going to be taking your young nephew, is it, John?
Yeah, young nephew's coming up in the new year. My sister's at the in-laws for Christmas, so up in the new year, and we'll be playing some golf, so I have to take him out to Big Swing Golf Northmead and maybe pick up a Chrissy present for him.
Yes, well, Big Swing Golf, it's located right next to Drummond Golf there at Northmead. They're part of the group, and there's all sorts of simulated sports that you can play down there at Big Swing Golf Northmead. So over the Christmas holidays, maybe get a group of your mates together, enjoy a bit of party time down there. And, great venue. They're great sponsors of the Cumberland Throw. And both Big Swing Golf Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. As we say every week, we wouldn't be able to get the podcast done. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we do on the Cumberland Throw without our great partners, our great sponsors. So if you get the opportunity, do support the people that support the Cumberland Throw. And fellas, thank you for another fine podcast. Thank you to all of our listeners out there. We know there's lots of you there. We appreciate the feedback that you send through, whether it be the messages that you send through or the occasional replies that we have to our podcast posts. We really do appreciate it. And we're out here doing these podcasts to try and get this, the latest on the Eels and the NRL out to you. So again, thank you. And as I always say, everyone, go you mighty Eels.